9 years after the implementation of institutionalized apartheid, racial tensions are on the rise. Women are being forced to carry identification passes too, leading to major protests and strikes. Meanwhile, in London, Tom Hopkinson, renowned journalist and previous editor of Picture Post magazine, is living a slow-paced life with his wife, Dorothy.
Since leaving Picture Post, I tried my hand at a variety of experiences, such as writing books, reviewing, and working for a daily newspaper, but I'd been unable to find any satisfying purpose in life.
However, things were about to change. A few years earlier, Hopkinson met Jim Bailey, a British aviator and businessman. Bailey moved to South Africa in 1946. There, he had been invited to help finance a new magazine called The African Drum. He eventually took over the publication, changing its name to simply Drum. After meeting Hopkinson, Bailey sent him issues of Drum for criticism and comment. On October 30th, 1957, a letter that would eventually lead Hopkinson to Johannesburg arrived.
I know that you, Tom, possess innumerable ties in London town. Would you not, however, consider seriously taking on this venture of ours for several years and see what you can do with it? For a great deal can be done once there is skill and understanding here. Best wishes, Jim Bailey.
Though sympathetic to the idea of a black man's magazine in a country dominated by whites, I'd never considered going to live and work there.
It was Dorothy who convinced Hopkinson to take the offer seriously, and by April 1958, both had settled in Johannesburg. Drum had been making a name for itself since 1951. As a magazine aimed at urbanized black South Africans, its pages presented a vibrant mixture of stories. From hard A columns, sports coverage, and cover girls to politics, crime, and investigative journalism, its eclectic approach mirrors South Africa's urgent political issues and social concerns, which were a result of the independence from colonialism, the urbanization of its population, and increasing public interest in politics. The development of the style that made Drum so popular was due to the passion of the staff, few of whom had formal journalistic training. The individuals behind Drum's popularity include Henry Noxumalo, later known as Mr. Drum, famous for his expose stories such as the Bethal Farm, which disclosed images of the harsh recruiting methods and the inhumane conditions of the workers. Can Themba was a short story writer who had a popular column titled Talk of the Town. Todd Matsikisa led two columns, one that reviewed jazz music and another one called With the Lead Off, which captured his reflections on township life. The photojournalist Bob Rosani made his name from his pictures of the Tausa dance, a humiliating technique that officials used to search prisoners. Cassie Motsisi wrote a popular column named On the Beat that narrated part fictional, part factual accounts of his escapades to the Shebins, which were unlicensed alcohol establishments. Among other prominent characters were Nat Nakasa, Arthur Maymain, Ezekiel Mfelele, Peter Magubane, and George R. Naindu. The lack of formality from the staff, which sometimes resulted in late arrivals or delayed submissions, was not always appreciated by Hopkinson. Excluding this and his initial disagreements with Bailey concerning expenses and the format of the magazine, Hopkinson was quick to understand what underpinned Drum's success and the importance of developing its potential further.
Ours was not much of a place, but in one respect it was unique to the rest of the city, for within our walls there was no apartheid, no separate entrances for blacks and no separate lifts. Blacks and whites sat and worked side by side.
Soon enough, however, Hopkinson would learn that the consequences of apartheid were unavoidable. In 1959, Sidney Andrews, one of the office assistants, was harshly beaten by a police officer. Hopkinson took the case to court. On his initiative, Ian Berry had taken pictures of Sidney's face after the beating. That evidence allowed them to win the case. The judgment, a fine amounting to a fortnight's pay, was light in comparison to the brutality of the act. However, it showed how photography could serve as a legal weapon in the struggle against apartheid, and it wouldn't be the last time under Hopkinson's editorship that Ian Berry's pictures would serve such purpose. In the 1940s, the African National Congress, ANC, was remodeled as a mass movement to defend the rights of black South Africans. In 1958, as a result of deep political differences, some of which concerned disagreements about the strategic value of civil disobedience, a group of people resolved to break away from the ANC and form an alternate political party. The Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, led by Robert Sobukwe, did not believe in an elaborate organization. Their aim was to originate resistance against institutionalized apartheid through dramatic gestures. In the early 1960s, it had become known that Sobukwe would make a dramatic call for action against the past laws on the Monday, 21st of March. The party's leaders were prepared to get arrested and go to prison in the hope of setting off a chain reaction.
Since no other paper was taking the PAC movement seriously, we wanted to play the story big. We agreed that the most reasonable solution would be to lead the April issue with an article called "Who Are the Africanists?" In it, we would tell the story of the movement's growth leading up to the present attempt. I even arranged to put the magazine on sale 2 days early, the day the call for action was due to take effect. A bit after 10 a.m, we got a call from a contact of Ian Berry that said that the trouble was boiling up in Sharpeville.
Ian Berry and Humphrey Tyler took off, unaware that they would be the only 2 journalists among the crowd in Sharpeville.
We went into Sharpeville behind a grey police car. As we drove through the fringe of the township, we heard people shouting the Pan-Africanist slogan, which meant our land. They were cheerful. Nobody seemed to be afraid. Then the shooting started. We heard the chatter of a machine gun, then another, then another. The shots had a deep sound. Some of these people were laughing, probably thinking the police were firing blanks. But they were not. Bodies were falling behind them and among them. One woman was hit about 10 yards from our car. Her companion, a young man, went back when she fell. He thought she had stumbled. Then he turned over in the grass and saw that her chest had been shot away. He looked at his hand. There was blood on it. He said, "My God, she's gone." There were hundreds of kids running too. Some of the children were leaping like rabbits, hardly as tall as the grass. Some of them were hit too. Most of the bodies were strewn over the road which runs through the field we were in. One by one the guns stopped shooting. There was nobody moving in our field, except Berry. The rest were wounded or dead. There was no crowd anymore. It was very quiet.
69 people lost their lives. After the massacre, strikes and protests broke out, and the government declared a state of emergency. Drum offices in Durban, Cape Town, and Johannesburg were raided by the police. The magazine avoided legal prosecution by arguing that the emergency regulations had gone into effect on the 30th of March, and the April issue, which contained the article on the Africanists, had been printed on the 21st. However, Bailey decided that it would be too dangerous to publish the pictures. Hopkinson distributed them to London, and they were published in Life magazine, causing international shock. The pictures were not published in South Africa until 7 months later. Drum's May issue, however, included a feature of the Sharpeville funeral with pictures taken by Peter Magubane. The layout was solemn. The text was minimal, and the main focus was directed towards the caskets lying on the floor. Magubane's pictures are striking and touching. The composition draws a line between the caskets and the people. This compels the viewer to focus on the empty space, emphasizing the loss and grief permeating the scene. In the October issue, a more strident political point was made. The images were placed alongside an article on the aftermath of the event, which emphasized the government's dismissive response by presenting specific quotations in bold. The Sharpeville images were followed by a series of protest pictures. The figures of authority are shown in an impersonal light, often with their backs turned, whilst the protesters seem to be directly engaged with the cameras. This presentation, alongside the article of the funeral in the May issue, embodied and intensified the public's frustration and anger against the government, making a powerful point that might not have been accomplished if the images had been published right away. When the case was taken to court, various pictures served to disprove the government's testimony, which argued that the people in the crowd were armed and police officers had started shooting in self-defense. In 1961, Hopkinson had to decide if he would renew his contract with Drum. Hopkinson was frustrated that Bailey took decisions without any discussion and had not developed a concrete plan for Drum's expansion. For his part, Bailey felt that Hopkinson wanted his way too much, resented criticism, had no proper regard for finance, and had not yet adapted to the circumstances in South Africa. In the end, Hopkinson decided to resign. On his last day, he had some drinks with his staff. Among them were Peter Magubane, Nat Nakasa, and Kasi Motsisi.
After saying goodbye to everyone, I climbed into my car to go back home. For the last hour or so, I realised I'd been shivering all over. The room had been stuffy and crowded, but it seemed as though all vital warmth had been drained out of me.
Afterwards, Hopkinson and Dorothy stayed in Africa, and he was eventually invited to set up the first journalism school in Nairobi, where he worked until 1966. Due to increasing government strictures, Drum eventually became unsustainable, and Bailey was forced to sell it. Arguably, the publication had tried to be too many things at once: a magazine with mass appeal, a vehicle for emerging African writers and photographers, and a news magazine in the style of Paris Match. During the 50s, it faced little competition, but by the end of the 60s, both the publishing and political landscapes had shifted. The fate of the rest of Drum's writers was mixed. Ezekiel Mfelele developed a prominent career in literature, and Peter Magubane ended up working with Magnum Photos and Time magazine. Cam Themba and Todd Machikisa both died in exile, and Nat Nakasa committed suicide. Some blame this on the fact that he wasn't allowed to re-enter his country after going to New York to study journalism. Drum gave black writers and photojournalists the means to represent the situation in South Africa and an outlet to voice their frustrations. However, it wasn't entirely exempted from contemporary racial attitudes. Following the Sharpeville Massacre, for instance, the staff sent a memorandum calling attention to pay inequality between black and white staff and threatening a boycott. Notwithstanding, Drum is still relevant today because it serves as a visual record of the independence era history and as an example of the competing factors that both facilitated and frustrated the creation of a South African cultural identity through the mass media in the early years of apartheid.